Hello and welcome back to my channel. Sometimes we do cosplay and sometimes we do spooky stories, and today we're going to be doing some atheist witchery. This is not a tutorial on how to do a freeze spell, so if you are looking for a step-by-step tutorial, I can't help you. Part of the joy for spells, for me, is the art of it. And so I really like to be the designer of the spell and the creator of the spell. But if that's not the part that excites you, if you are more of the doer, maybe go check out a book or surf around YouTube. But I'm sure that you can find a lot of different examples about how to do a freezing spell. Okay, so here's a question. If your spell is just an open label placebo, then what is the point of doing the spell in the first place if you know that there's no supernatural power behind the spell? How do you not feel silly about it? How is it actually going to work? And B, do you have to really passionately believe in your placebo effect? Do you have to really focus on believing? Do you have to fool yourself to believe for this spell to be functional? That is a very good question, and it does seem very counterintuitive. Many studies do show that open label placebos can work to treat often pain, discomfort, and sometimes mood. So when I'm creating a ritual, I have to consider what things do I have control over? What things can I affect? And your brain is very powerful and it can affect things for you personally, but it's not going to be affecting anything outside of yourself. So let's say I am on the job hunt and I'm really frustrated and I'm doing everything in my power to look for a job, but I'd like to feel some sort of sense of control. So the goal of the spell isn't necessarily going to be somehow influencing the person in the company that's doing the hiring and, forcing them to pick up the phone and give me a call. But the goal of the spell could be for me to have more patience, for me to have more courage, self-advocacy, for me to have more energy to go to interviews or to make phone calls or send emails. Can you make a spell to try to motivate someone that's in charge of hiring, try to motivate them to choose you? Yeah, do it, because I think that the feeling of control over that situation might give you that underlying confidence that maybe when you go into the interview, if you've done the spell ahead of time, maybe it'll take away a little bit of that fear and intimidation from that person. And so subconsciously that might make you perform better in your interview. Why not? So if your spells are very positive, you might see some positive effects that you may not even have considered. And I think that's why it's important to go ahead and do those spells, and don't get too bogged down with whether or not, it's possible that they'll work. Really, you're not wasting your time when you're doing spells. Spells are very relaxing, they're very meditative, they can make you consider things in a way that you may have not considered. And so it's just, don't be afraid of it being a waste of time. It's a good use of time. And don't be afraid that it makes you silly. Okay, so we are going to do a spell to freeze someone, and this person is very far removed from me and I have no control over that person. So part of the freeze, I think, is going to be comforting for me, because when that person makes me upset, makes me aggravated, when I hear that person say things that are really inflammatory, then I can think about the fact that that person is frozen because of my spell, and that might give me a little bit more peace to deal with that person. So it might not stop them from saying the things that hurt me, but it might help me cope. So let's start by putting their name on a piece of paper. You could use maybe a quill pen if that makes you feel more fancy, but I'm using my big fat Sharpie because I mean it. Okay. Now, of course, with any sort of hoodoo type of ritual, it helps if you have something from that person. So maybe if you have a picture of that person, or maybe you have writing from that person, that would be really helpful. And so when you fold this, you want to fold it away from yourself, because you're kind of protecting yourself from this person and their issues. And you can fold this up really, really tightly to really bind this person, but I think I'm just going to do the one fold because I'm going to do tight binding with fabric. So I just have some scrap fabric here left over from a craft project, and so I'm just going to cut some strands off of this. Okay, so we have some strips here of fabric, and these are going to act as our binding. Okay, and let's say I have some hair from this person. Okay, so you might have noticed that this is kind of a gag spell because obviously I do not have this person's hair. So now we're just going to bind this paper, this bandage, and I'm going to try to make it as tight as I can. And while I'm doing this, I want my thoughts to be sort of empty, I think. I want to do this in a very meditative state. Okay, so we have this little package here. I'm going to add another. We'll just bulk this up a little bit. Here we go. There's my little package. Before I go any further, I want to see if it fits inside my jar. Oh. Yeah, barely. And you can use any kind of jar for this, mason jar or whatever. Okay, so now you think like, oh, I'll put this inside here and I'll fill it up with water, I'll seal it up, and I'll throw that into my freezer. And you want to be careful about doing that because if you fill the jar too full with water, as the water freezes, it will expand and it could possibly break your jar in your freezer, and then you've got a bunch of broken glass to deal with in your freezer, and nobody wants that. So instead what I'm going to do is I have just a cup of water right here, and so I'm just going to plop him right into this water, and he's going to soak up all the water. Okay, so what are some things that I need to consider while I'm making my spell? There is a thought, and we're not really sure where this thought originated from. There's a lot of possibilities for the origin, but in Wicca and in some other pagan religions, there is a rule of 3 where if you put out something bad, like if you try to curse somebody, then you're going to bring 3 instances of curse back onto you. So if you do a freezing spell on somebody, that could, if you want to be harmful to that person, then that harm may come back at you. And I actually really love the concept of karma because it does seem like some universal justice. And I don't think that karma makes sense in our world because, of course, really awful things do happen to really kind, wonderful people. And there are plenty of awful people out there who will just have easy lives and nothing bad will ever happen to them. And the universe is just not a just place. But it's good to have justice for yourself. So I do like the concept of holding yourself accountable and, knowing that if you do something harmful, that it's going to come back to you. So that's why when I do a freezing spell, I'm not trying to necessarily harm that person. I'm just telling them that they need to cool off, which maybe is good for that person, right? Maybe that person just needs to cool off. Maybe they need a timeout. Maybe they need to think about what they did. And, if this is a person that you work with or that you're close with that you can't, maybe it's your mother-in-law or something like that, and you really have to interact with that person, if you do that freezing spell, then if they're coming at you and they're a little mean and nasty, you can just kind of picture them frozen in your freezer, and that might be a little bit cathartic for you, and it might give you a thicker skin and sort of help you deal with that whole situation, because it gives you a little bit of a sense of control. Hey, you're not so powerful, you can't hurt me, you're actually just frozen in my fridge at my house. Okay, let's see if I can do this without making a huge mess. I have a towel here to put in my lap. Okay. Alright, so we're going to take the cap off of this jar, then we're going to put this soaked little bundle right in there. Ugh. Now he's soggy enough that if I freeze him right now, he should freeze. And the wonderful thing about a freezing spell is that if it sort of thaws out, or if you're not feeling the comforting effects of the freezing spell, you can always take it apart, redo it, and then throw it back into the freezer again. So yeah, you can put it in your freezer, but happy Halloween. I'm in the Midwest in the United States, and we actually had a little bit of a blizzard, so I've got plenty of natural snow outside. So I think I'm going to take this guy, and I think he's going to go into the freezer that is my backyard right now. What did we learn today? Yes, there are lots of pre-made rituals out there, But it's also extremely fun to make them your own way, and you can do them however you want. And there's no wrong way to do a ritual. Like, whatever you're doing is correct. Open label placebo is extremely powerful, even if you know that the spell doesn't do anything, and even if you feel silly while you're doing the spell, like, it's still a ritual, and your brain is so receptive to that because just from ancient times, we've always been very receptive to ritual. Don't feel like you have to fool yourself into thinking that your ritual is working. You can have a fun sense of humor about it the whole time, and it still is probably going to have a somewhat positive effect. And if it doesn't, find something else that works for you. But it's definitely worth a shot, and it's not going to hurt anything. All right, so have fun out there. Go put together a bunch of rituals. Go and freeze your mother-in-law. Okay, let's go take him outside where he belongs. Okay, well, he's gone. He's outside getting frozen. I had a very good time, and I hope to see you here again soon. Bye!